Welcome to BayBrazil Annual Conference, edition number 9. I'm tuning in from Silicon Valley, where a cloud of smoke is covering the entire region. Wildfires burned more than 300,000 acres across the state, forcing thousands of residents to evacuate. The San Jose Mercury News posted this morning that the fire has reached Big Basin State Park, one of the sanctuaries of 1,000-year-old redwoods and California's oldest nature preserve, one of my favorites. So it's beyond sad what's happening, and it's a somber reminder of the changes our planet is going through. So our today's discussion on sustainability and the future of food becomes even more timely, sadly. So I'm pleased to host today very active leaders who work on global environmental policies. Here they are. Leonardo Fleck, Program Officer for Conservation and Markets Initiatives at Gordon and Betty Moore Foundation. Hi, Leo. Welcome. Andrea Ozzoli, Vice President of Global Impact Initiatives at Planet Labs. Welcome, Andrew.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Joaquim Levy, Director of Banco Safra, Global Board of Directors at World Resources Institute, and former Minister of Brazil. Hi, Joaquim, welcome.
How are you doing?
Great, great. Good to see you, and great to have you here to discuss such a timely topic. So before we actually start hearing your insights, I would like to introduce BayBrazil to those of you joining us for the first time, both here at Zoom and on Facebook. Bem-vindos e obrigada por participarem. I'll be sharing my screen here with you just to give a sense of what is BayBrazil and what we've been doing in these past years. So this edition of our conference is very special because June marked BayBrazil's 10-year anniversary. To celebrate, we are expanding our conference into a series of online events. Since mid-June, our guest speakers are recapping the innovation path of Brazil and the US in the past decade and showcasing major disruptions that will shape the next decade. So I founded BayBrazil in 2010. At that time, Brazil's entrepreneurial community was starting to flourish. However, here in the San Francisco Bay Area, not only was no one talking about Brazil, but entrepreneurs, engineers, and tech leaders didn't know one another. So I founded BayBrazil to build the Brazilian American tech community in Silicon Valley and connect it to Brazil. One of the instruments we use to bring this tech hub together is events. So we started building this community from the ground up, one conversation at a time, one meeting at a time, one introduction at a time. Today, our community is over 15,000 people connected people reconnected or got to know one another for the first time. We introduced leading players from over 100 Brazilian and America small and business sized companies. We so far organized over 150 both public and private events with in-depth discussions in various sectors to promote dialogue and more information. And we are fostering entrepreneurship by promoting startups, more information among the startups, and possibilities for startups to work with mentors and to connect with potential investors. In 2012, we launched BayBrazil Annual Conference at Stanford University. We gathered entrepreneurs, investors, and private sector leaders to discuss technology, innovation, and the roles of US and Brazil in the global economy. And we've been keeping this going for 9 years. Not only we are presenting in-depth dialogues, but we are offering tech leaders the opportunity to meet one another, to learn with one another. And we are also bringing prominent founders such as Brian Acton, co-founder of WhatsApp, and Mike Krieger, co-founder of Instagram, who was with us in 2017 at Google. The latest in-person editions of our conference were at LinkedIn in San Francisco and at SRI International in Menlo Park. Here are some of the programs we've been designing for our partners and for tech leaders in our hub to connect and to engage in meaningful dialogues. We also have been interviewing leaders both from Brazil and the US to add information and inspiration to our hub. Nina Silva, for example, is the founder of the Movimento Black Money, which fosters entrepreneurship and education in the Brazilian Black community. Peter Norvig, he's a reference in AI. He is the research director of AI at Google. BayBrazil is proud to partner with key players both in Silicon Valley and in Brazil who are committed to strengthening our bilateral innovation hub. BayBrazil's board of directors embodies a cross-section of Brazilian American executives residing in the Bay Area who I'm having the pleasure to work with to grow and to shape our organization. And today we are discussing sustainability and the future of food. We are discussing several topics over the past few weeks up to September 10. And today I'm pleased to welcome here these global leaders that are working on environmental policies across the globe. So I want to invite back Leonardo Fleck, who will be moderating this discussion with Andrew Zoli and Joaquim Levy. Welcome back, Leo, and thank you so much for joining us and also for participating in our hub and help us to make our community more interesting and more diverse.
Thank you, Margarise. This is very exciting. Thank you for inviting me to moderate the first panel on sustainability and the future of food as part of the BayBrazil Annual Conference. I hope that this becomes the first and has a continuation in the next few years, given the relevance of the topic for businesses and investors. It is also a great privilege to be with such an outstanding group of panelists who brings so much insight on the topic. I'm very confident that we will have a very stimulating conversation. So before we jump into the conversation with Levi and with Andrew, I'd like to spend some time setting up the context for the conversation. My key message here is that sustainability is finally becoming an integral part of decision-making in markets, in the financial sector, and in public policy, as we have never seen before. The pace of this transition is accelerating very rapidly, and I would dare to say that within 3 to 5 years, the world will be very different from what it is today. It will be different with regards to how sustainability factors are incorporated in every transaction, investment, and policy discussion, including global trade. This will happen largely because of the increasing awareness of these stakeholders to the materiality of sustainability factors to their decision-making processes, and to the improved capacity of these decision makers to take action to mitigate those problems in their operations, supply chains, and portfolios. That capacity to take action has a lot to do with technological breakthroughs that are happening today, that are emerging today. These technologies will enable the measurement and the monitoring of sustainability key performance indicators, KPIs, something that was never possible before. Limited measurement for those who do not work intensively on sustainability has been a recurrent challenge for sustainability professionals in this community. And we all know that right? That if you can't measure, you can't manage. So this is why I believe that we are getting into a sustainability revolution over the next few years. And it is kind of paradoxical to say that the terrible crisis we are facing today may actually help us accelerate that process. So I would like to highlight that with some anecdotes that illustrate why I believe we are gearing towards that direction. I hope that at the end of this panel discussion, you all will have a similar impression based on what you will hear from the other panelists. So let me share here my, can I share my screen? Let me see here. Okay. I have a few slides here. Can you see my screen? Yep.
Yes, Leo.
Okay, great. So, so I would like to start with, the tremendous economic opportunity that exists, that is yet untapped around sustainability investments. The World Economic Forum has just released a few weeks ago this groundbreaking report that illustrates that the world, if the world prioritized nature and nature investments in what we call nature-based solutions, we could have almost 400 million more jobs in place in a world that is actually struggling to generate more jobs. And this could create $10 trillion more in terms of business opportunities. So there's a huge opportunity for ingenious entrepreneurs and risk-taking investors to just jump in. If we don't act, there is also a significant cost of inaction, right? And I think many people overlook how much that cost may be. And there are several studies now showing those numbers, and I just illustrate one here. There's an expectation that as climate change escalates and people perceive more of the impacts of climate change, governments, especially in developing countries, will start to enact policies that are much more stringent than the policies we have today. And we kind of are seeing this happening already in the European Union. And the question is, how policies in a place like the European Union will affect entire sectors and businesses all over the world, given that we live in a globalized world, right? The expectation is that by 2025, those policies are gonna be in place. So we have about 5 years to actually adapt to that new reality. At the same time, we are seeing an unprecedented level of investments flowing through sustainability funds. And this news came, I think last week, for the first time, sustainability funds are hitting $1 trillion, and this is only growing. The funny thing is, or the sad thing is that actually ESG investments, which is usually the terminology used for like environmental, social investments that follow environmental, social, and governance criteria, those types of investments are actually demonstrating a much better performance in the marketplace than conventional investments in the middle of the COVID crisis, which shows the degree of resilience that those businesses have, and the preparedness that those businesses have to deal with risks and opportunities with regards to ESG criteria. The other thing is, as I mentioned before, measurement is key, right? And often companies, they do not disclose their sustainability practices because that is not mandatory, because that's not the practice, because they may not know how to do it or the data doesn't exist. But this is changing. There is a major global effort called the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is still voluntary, but which already has more than 500 global companies disclosing their sustainability performance alongside their financial disclosures, right? And this is only gonna grow. And actually there are discussions in place in the European Union to make those disclosures mandatory. So imagine all companies who operate in Europe, not necessarily the only European companies, but companies that may have a headquarters in Brazil or the US, but operate in Europe, they may have to do that as well. So better get prepared now, right, than getting surprised on it later. In the European Union, we are also seeing a movement to require due diligence processes by companies, again, operating in Europe, which may mean that companies will have to establish very robust due diligence processes in their investments and their supply chains connected overseas in any country in the world to make sure that they are respecting the local laws and abiding to sustainability criteria, right? So if this happens, and there's a bill being discussed now by the parliament in Europe, if this happens, this will have tremendous ripple effects all over the world. And finally, going to a topic that is very dear to Brazil, Brazil has been spending now 20 years negotiating a trade deal with Europe alongside other Mercosur members, right? It's a groundbreaking deal, taking a lot of time, a lot of negotiation. Finally, Mercosur is getting close to getting a deal, and it is now being heavily scrutinized and even threatened because of lack of proper safeguards that can ensure that if there is a trade deal, if there's trade, that trade is actually respecting the laws and the environment in South America. So this is just to illustrate that, it's not just companies, it's not just financial institutions, it's also the trade and how trade works and globally that is kind of starting to be affected by this dynamics. So let me take my video out here. Okay. I don't want to spend more time. I think the idea was to leave some topics for reflection so we can then use that as a reference for the conversation. But before I go into the conversation with Levi and Andrew, I would like to provide a few more details about their background. I think they are amazing professionals, and I just want everybody to know all the great things that they have done before. So Levi is an academic fellow of the Stanford University's Steyer Taylor Center of Energy Policy and Finance, global board member of WRI, as Margarise mentioned before, is the Director of Economic Strategy and Market Relations at the Banco Safra in Brazil, and is a former CEO of Bradesco's Asset Management branch in Brazil, and the former Brazilian Minister of Finance and former President of the Brazilian Development Bank. So it's a real privilege to have you, Levi, here. Thank you for joining us. Andrew is the Vice President of Global Impact for Planet Labs, a geospatial imaging startup that I'm sure everybody knows, who has developed and deployed the largest constellation of Earth observing satellites in history.
Sorry to interrupt. Could you please stop sharing your screen? Sorry to interrupt.
Okay. I thought I did that.
It's all right.
Let's see. Can you do that? Because I don't have that option here anymore.
Just leave and then come back.
Yeah. Okay, I got it. Thank you. Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So, so Andrew has is also very well known for being a writer and a thinker in the technology space related to social and economic impact. And he's also the author of a best-selling book called Resilience, Why Things Bounce Back. And that's the hot topic of the moment, right? As we were discussing before. So it'll be very exciting to hear a little bit from Andrew on that topic. And alongside that, he's also the international board member of Human Rights Watch. So to start with a question to Andrew. Andrew, you have been thinking of these global trends for a while, right? We have been talking about this for a couple of years, and I have always been impressed with your vision and and the big vision that you have. You have also written and spoken about resilience, as I just mentioned, which is really important now in times of COVID, in times of forest fires and climate change. Could you please share with us your views on these topics and how you see them shaping our future?
Sure. And also, I just want to say thank you so much for having me. It's a delight to be here with all of you today. And I'm really looking forward to a great conversation. We live in a very interesting moment in contemporary human history, in which we are facing challenges that are larger than our cognition. The challenge of the loss of nature, the challenge of climate change, the challenge of managing the human footprint on the earth requires us to think in units that are bigger than our cognition. And it kind of swamp our normal ways of thinking. And so, we've not faced challenges like this before. Just to give people a sense, we're living through the 6th extinction of life on Earth. This is the 6th time in the history of life when biodiversity has dramatically collapsed. But we're also living through the 2nd Renaissance, which is a fascinating thing. The amount of knowledge and capacity, competency is also unrivaled, and it's also bigger than our cognition. So we don't fully really understand. It's hard to internalize the scope of the challenges we confront. It's also hard to internalize the capabilities that we have to work on those problems. And I'm fully convinced that if you think about, so now let's think about for a moment the fundamental challenges that are in front of us. The first one is that human beings have now terraformed the earth. We've transformed the landscape. 75% of the landmass of the earth has been transformed by human beings, primarily for agriculture and secondarily for livestock, for habitats, for cities and communities, and for resource extraction. So we put enormous pressure on the balance of what's left. And we have to remember that we are going to have several billion new people arrive who aren't even here yet between now and the end of the century. 1 billion people arriving in just the next decade, who we have to feed, house, clothe, provide livelihoods to, and give a path to prosperity. We have to do that in a way that works within what are called the planetary boundaries, the essential systems that provide the life support for the planet. And it's not just the climate system, it's the nitrogen cycle, it's the carbon cycle, it's fresh water. So we have a very complex management set of tasks to do in an environment when we're putting enormous pressure on those exact systems. So the very big headline I want to say to everybody who's watching is that somebody, maybe someone in this audience, in this webinar today, will become a billionaire or maybe even a trillionaire in this century for helping to solve these challenges. Now, because in this moment, the rewards for ecological efficiency, the rewards for managing the human footprint and increasing the bounty that human beings enjoy without harming and further harming the underlying ecological and life-giving systems of the planet, that's an ecological priority of the first order. This is an emergency moment. We are living through the most important decade when we will either lock in some of those negative effects or we will escape some of those negative effects. So the ecological benefits are enormous, and the economic benefits of doing so are going to be enormous, because that efficiency translates into economic efficiency. So the kind of the meta story that we have to think about is, how do we bounce forward, especially in this COVID moment? How do we bounce forward to a more carbon, a lower carbon, smarter, more efficient allocation of our resources, and still produce a path to prosperity for people? And if we don't do that, and there, as you said, you showed it in your slides, Leo, you know, that there's an enormous upward path, but there's also a downside risk. And the transition to a sustainable future is going to be very bumpy. So we need to build in shock absorbers. So sustainability and resilience are really twin sides of an important dynamic. The sustainability side is, how do we improve efficiency while not destroying the system? And the resilience side of the story is, how do we ensure that when there are inevitable shocks and disruptions, that everything doesn't fall apart and that we can quickly recover. So one is about managing upside opportunity, one is about managing downside risk. We'll talk more about what Planet does in this context in a moment, but the big narrative here really is about increasing the information intensivity of everything. We use this term digital transformation, and it sounds kind of dry, but really what we're talking about is using the tools of information to get more and more precise in the ways in which we allocate energy and material and effort and work to improve the efficiency. So we're going to use the tools of artificial intelligence and big data and remote sensing. These tools are going to be inseparable from the ways in which we understand, manage, and protect the bounty of the planet. So they're really kind of one big agenda. If you care about the tech side of that, there are going to be enormous opportunities. If you care about the environmental side of that, there are going to be enormous opportunities. And the last thing I'll say is, at the very top of that path is really a kind of rethink about what constitutes capitalism in the first place. Capitalism has produced enormous wealth and enormous inequality in the world, and it's incomplete. And a big part of the reason it's incomplete is because it doesn't accommodate things that we today think of as freely available. All of the natural capital and natural bounty of the world. You know, the company Amazon is measured continuously every millisecond in terms of its value. But the actual Amazon doesn't have any formal economic value until you cut the trees down and turn them into pastureland. That has to change in capitalism, and it will on the back of these new information technologies, which we can talk about later.
Thank you, Andrew. It's interesting that several years ago, when somebody challenged capitalism, it would look like very utopian and weird, right? But now we are seeing not obviously a movement to rewire the entire system, but there are mainstream people now questioning their own assumptions about capitalism. And we have even seen the Business Roundtable in the US last year, which is a major roundtable that represents many global companies, saying that they need to move into focusing much more on the stakeholders and not so much on the shareholders as they report, on progress and results. We don't know where that's going to get us to, but I think is a significant signal, at least, that this thing is getting traction, right?
And in private capital markets, Leo, I might add just one really strong signal we got, which we sort of forgot about because COVID took over and became the only thing that we're thinking about these days, at the global level. But at the beginning of the year, Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, which manages trillions and trillions of dollars of assets, sent a letter to the CEOs of every major company on earth and said, from now on, we will consider climate risk to be investment risk. And, Larry Fink and BlackRock and COVID did more to pivot the attention of major global asset holders and corporate entities, perhaps than 100 UN conferences, because suddenly everybody said, here's our plan to get to, net carbon neutral, net carbon negative by the middle of the century. By 2030, they're starting to compete with each other because those are market signals, and they indicate, what the expected performance will be tomorrow.
No, thanks for reminding us of that. That's definitely as a milestone. I'd like to shift to Joaquin Levy now. And Levy, you are one of the few people I know who has worked both at the private and on public finance internationally with the World Bank in Brazil. And you have dedicating a lot of your time very generously to help organizations figure out scalable solutions for sustainability in Brazil. So thank you very much for that. I have actually benefited a lot from conversations with you on that, which you bring a quite unique perspective on these issues. So I would like to ask you your take on these things, right? On these trends. Are there any specific elements of this future scenario that you believe are more salient in terms of shaping how future markets and trade relations will work, thinking of, let's say, the next 3 to 5 years? So companies and investors should be paying attention on those things now.
Okay. Yes, and I think, first, it's a pleasure to participate in this conference, and I wish well to all the participating and of the whole spirit of getting Brazil at the Bay Area. That's very good. And I would say that a little bit in line with what Andrew mentioned is that perhaps the big change that we have seen in the last 2 years has been this repricing of risk. It has started slowly, but it's getting more and more important. We have the TCFD, this task force for the climate change financial disclosure that has started back in 2014, actually 15. We had a Bloomberg report about the stranded assets. Now this has come to our normal conversation. But I think this repricing will be the most dominant thing. And we now see also central banks getting into this. We have this network to green the financial system, which is basically a bunch of European central banks, but also central banks from different places. I was just got to know that Brazil has joined, and we've been working with it for some time, and now they decide to join. And why is this important? First, because they are incorporating this into their prudential regulation and their supervision work. And in a very systematic way, they're bringing the language of risk management in a different way. You cannot do it just looking back to the past or trying to fit normal curves. We already know this in other aspects, but even more true in the case of climate. So there's a lot of learning, and in some cases can be what may seem small steps. But I take you an example, for instance, the Bank of France. When they ask all the banks in France to do a stress test, even if it's a very simple stress test, the banks have to start to ask questions to companies. What is their exposure to climate change? What is their exposure to regulatory changes? We have all this work at PRI that discusses what could happen to the price of stocks and equity if suddenly you have a mandatory carbon price? Well, of course, the banks will start to ask all these questions to the companies they finance. And then you get all those wheels moving and people thinking in a different way. Of course, there's a little bit of irony when, Andrew was saying, people sometimes blame capitalism to put a price on everything. And well, now probably they're going to put a price not only on the impact of climate change, but then on everything that could mitigate or could increase the resilience against climate change. And this is the nature of capitalism. But I think this is really the biggest thing. And I believe you would have a big impact also on the largest challenge, which is energy transition. We all see a few things. You guys in California have now this whole discussion about the impact of renewables and so on. We know that in most places, renewable actually are still a small fraction of total energy. In many countries, big countries, even as a part of electricity, still 3/4, 75% is fossil fuels and sometimes even coal, let alone when you take all transportation and everything. Very few countries are like Brazil, where the share of fossil is much smaller. But this is a big challenge, and do not be, say, overcome without first good regulation. So there's plenty of things, of people that will think about how to measure, how to regulate, and how to get solutions to deal with that, as well as to save, to integrate, and all of these things that require, like Andrew was saying, a completely different level of knowledge, like you said, of measurement, and then of control. And I think that together with the pricing of the risks, I think money will flow for these activities and how you can, for instance, have more artificial intelligence predicting patterns of consumption of energy and the ways of producing. So I think these are the two main drivers. And of course, energy transition is not an easy thing. And the longer we wait, the more difficult it will be, because as you know, carbon is cumulative. So then you have to become carbon negative, which is even more difficult to do. So there will be money on big things like a real effective carbon sequestration, which does not exist, but then plenty of smaller things where startups can make a difference in everyday life, and in investors say wall, which means that I'm very confident that there will be financing and there will be interest for solution in these two areas. Pricing, and this goes very much beyond just finance, just designing indexes or building hedge funds or things like this. It really goes to finding solutions. And there's where ingenuity, imagination, real knowledge can make a difference.
Thank you, Levi. It's really interesting to hear that the demand for sustainability is there. Capital exists. Well, I think what we need now is good solutions, right? Good scalable solutions to address those challenges.
And I'm sure you're going to find them.
Exactly, especially with this crowd in this audience here. Moving back to Andrew and thinking about measurement, Andrew. When we talk about sustainability, we hear all these fancy acronyms like SDGs, which is Sustainable Development Goals, ESGs, which I referred to before, and so there's a great need of figuring out how you're gonna measure those things, right? Otherwise, we can't actually make much progress on these sustainability indicators. Planet, in a sense, I remember seeing Planet when Planet was founded, and the key message was that Planet was created for that, right? Planet was created for helping to develop planetary scale metrics for sustainability and obviously other things as well. Could you tell us a little more about how Planet is addressing that challenge? If you can bring some concrete examples, that would be great.
Absolutely, and it's a wonderful question, especially because it builds on the answer that Joaquin gave us a few minutes ago. So let's pick up on that thread of risk for a moment. So what do we see happening in this era where we have warmed the planet, we have terraformed the planet, we're trying to build, an integrated global footprint for humanity that can continue on the planet. As we've moved into the kind of red zone, we know that a couple of things. We are entering in periods of much greater uncertainty. We are entering into periods where we have much more connected forms of risk, and where the effects of exposure to risks and hazards can scale in very negative ways very quickly. And the simplest example is just to point to the wildfires in say Australia. We are living in a moment where in a matter of a few days you can have extraordinarily negative impacts. And what that suggests for measurement is not just that we are measuring things accurately in space, but also that we measure them continuously in time. So Planet was founded by a group of NASA scientists, and I'm going to show you a couple of things about us just for the people who are watching, so you can have a sense of how we do what we do. With this goal of using space to help life on Earth, and specifically to make global change visible, accessible, and actionable, and to produce it in very high resolution, so we're measuring the planet faster than the planet is changing, so that we can be aware of change at its sort of normal rate. That is, we're observing it in real time. So if you don't mind, I'm going to try and share my screen with you for a minute or two. Let's see if this works. Can you guys see my screen okay? Yeah. So for those of you who don't know much about Planet, I'll just show you a couple of things. We've put up, this is the satellite that we're best known for. We operate several parts of our constellation. They do different things. These satellites are very small. They're only about 30 centimeters from the front to the back. The wingspan is a little bit larger this way. The solar panels are underneath. These satellites are typically the size of school buses. They take hundreds of millions to billions of dollars to design and build. They're very conservatively built, and they're designed to last for decades. These satellites are very small. They use the kinds of technologies that are found in your cell phone, and they're far less expensive. So we can put hundreds of them up on orbit. So what we do is we put them in a special orbit that spins from the North Pole to the South Pole. And as the Earth spins perpendicularly underneath them, each one is a camera, and they collectively act as a line scanner and image the entire surface of the Earth every day in high resolution. That means we saw every field, every agricultural field, every forest, every city, including the buildings that every person listening to this talk in this discussion is in at the moment. Every day. We saw them yesterday and the day before. We'll see them tomorrow and the day after. Not at a resolution where we can read your newspaper. We're not trying to spy on you, but where we can see the rate of change, where we can understand how change is occurring. And let me show you what that looks like. Then we use the tools of artificial intelligence, and I'll just stop this for a moment so you can see this, to extract meaningful patterns from that underlying picture of the Earth. We download all of that data, we stitch it together, and here we're using the tools of computer vision, the same tools that Google uses to tell you whether that's a picture of a cat or a dog, to find all the buildings and all the roads. And this happens to be in downtown San Francisco where our offices are. But here what you'll see is our ability to do that for the whole Earth. So this is all the roads and all the buildings everywhere on a given day. And we can understand how that change occurs from today to tomorrow to the day after. So you can imagine all of the problems, especially in the sustainable development space, that are relevant for this. Here's just two that I'm going to pick out. One is being able to understand and watch deforestation. So here you can actually watch the process of deforestation in the Amazon happening in front of your eyes. We've sped it up so that several months of deforestation are occurring in several seconds. What you see here on the left of that animation is you see this process of deforestation occurring. On the left, if you look here, you'll see these little spindly illegal logging roads. Those are the roads that go in before the next round of deforestation occurs. And you can imagine how useful that is for arresting and stopping illegal deforestation. and also better planning for where we actually want to put in new agriculture, new livestock, pasture land, etc. Now, the other place where we can do this is we can combine lots of different kinds of data and that real-time analysis to tell us about the health, and not just today, but the expected health of every crop in every field tomorrow. Now, in the 1970s, 1960s, the world faced an enormous global food crisis, and the Green Revolution of the 1970s, which used specialized crops that were exceedingly responsive to nitrogen fertilizer, helped feed the world. Now we're in a situation where we need another revolution for agriculture, but we can't use the same tricks. So what are we going to do today? Well, today what we're doing is we're dramatically increasing the information about what the context in which those crops are growing. What happened today? What happened tomorrow? What are the other meteorological conditions that are underway? How fast are the crops growing, and what pests are invading the area? And as the amount of information goes up, we can use it to target in a precise way precisely how much water and fertilizer and insecticide and fungicide, precisely when to harvest, and to ensure maximum not only economic return but food security. So as the information intensivity goes up, the ecological intensivity goes down. And this is the sort of, the information is a new kind of input into agriculture at the level that we're practicing it here. These kinds of tools are the kinds of things that can help us get to a very different place. And I just want to show you this. This is a mental model we use a lot. I'll just stop here, about measurement. We call it the 4 Eyes framework, and we use it internally and we talk about it externally everywhere. We're living really through a series of revolutions. So at the bottom, we've got all these new forms of information, and there's enormous amounts of raw value, but unrefined value. In order to extract the value from the sensors we're putting in the ground and in the air and in space, we need this second revolution, which is in artificial intelligence and machine learning, that pulls the insights out of the underlying information. Then, with those insights, if they're stable enough over time, we can build new kinds of indicators. The indicators tell us about the health and vitality of the forest, of the field. And we don't have a Dow Jones for deforestation or a NASDAQ for nature, but we could, on the back of these kinds of what we call big indicators. And we call them big indicators because we mean them in reference to the way you think about big data. So as data is to big data, indicators are to big indicators. They are geographically complete. They deliver information in real time. They help you predict the future in a very different way. And if you have a continuously updated indicator that tells you about these things, then you can build new kinds of instruments. And by instruments, what we mean are technology, policy, and especially finance instruments. And if you think about what Joaquim and his colleagues have been doing, if you think about the efforts at all the central banks, at the private asset and equity holders, they're all looking to build new kinds of instruments that de-risk, in this era of accelerating risk, their portfolios and the performance of their economies. So all the technologists, organizations like Planet, we play at the bottom in the first 2 layers. The scientists play in the middle layer around the indicators, and it's really the financial institutions that play at the top level of the instruments. And we found this very helpful because people can sort of find themselves in the chart. Well, I play in this level and you play in that level. And we find that the way we're going to get there is all about collaboration. So I'll stop there.
Thanks, Andrew. This is really a groundbreaking data set, database that you are creating with all the actionable insights. And I think we will only learn what all the types of uses one can give to this data as we use the data, right? Because we never had something like that. So it's really, really incredible. I'd like to move to Levi again and talk about green recovery, right? We have been seeing a growing debate about the importance of green economic recovery, both globally and in Brazil, in the times of COVID crisis. And Levi, you have been part of actually 2 very important efforts on this space in Brazil. One is Convergência Brasil, BayBrazil, which is a group of 17 former ministers of finance and central bank presidents who have issued a letter advocating for a green recovery and for the end of deforestation in Brazil. You also have contributed to a report that was published last week with lots of media attention, the New Economy Brazil report, which shows that Brazil, if pursues a green recovery pathway, could generate 2 million additional jobs over the next 10 years and generate 2.8 trillion reals of additional GDP, right? So those numbers are not to be overlooked, right? They're quite significant numbers. So could you explain us how could a green recovery pathway help put Brazil back on track while achieving sustainability goals? If you could illustrate with a few key examples of where the biggest opportunities are, that would be great.
Okay, that's wonderful. Well, there are many, many ways to start from just reducing the cost of pollution in big cities, improve health, or decrease the cost of healthcare. There are many ways where changing the way you operate can interact to increase the possibility of growth. Moreover, as I mentioned briefly, Brazil is a country where there are problems, in particular in the Amazon, but outside of that, we are well ahead of most countries in terms of sustainable energy, sustainable production. You have all sorts of biofuels. Half of the fleet runs in alcohol and ethanol in a very competitive way. Now, surprising, I learned this only recently, 20% of our soybean is being used to produce diesel. We have about 12% of diesel, which is already biodiesel. And until the recent drop of oil prices, it was also very competitive. And there are complex things, all the technology that Andrew showed, which has been used more and more by agriculture and so on. I can, if you have time, I can explain more about this later. And with COVID, it did increase it even more. It's quite amazing. And of course, there are many ways, like you, Leo, mentioned. You have the big information, the data, and then there are thousands of ways to process this data, where I think there are a lot of opportunities. What I think fantastic about something like Andrew was showing is how many opportunities this open. I personally am involved in another project, which is natural regeneration in the Atlantic forest, which is fantastic. How you talk in the Atlantic forest is very different from the Amazon. In Atlantic forest, mostly are farms, but you have regulations that say you have set asides and so on. And actually, by doing that, to improve the value of the land, and you can use the information with the kind of data that you get there to show one by one to that farmer, look, you can get more from your cows or from whatever just by preserving a large area of your property. And this is what you're doing with a number of partners, TNC and many others right now. But let me give another example, completely different example also that I believe most people are not aware. Now, Brazil has something that no other country, I believe, has. It's not Carnival. It's how you do zero net carbon steel. Now, steel is one of the industries that has highest emission in the world because, as you know, you have to take the oxygen out of the iron ore, and to do that, you combine it with carbon. And here you go, you get all the CO2 in the atmosphere. And except if you move to hydrogen, with something that we were also thinking about and Brazil could do, because you can do renewable at low cost, maybe not now, but in 10 or 15 years, and we are working with the German to do that. But we have a very simple way that is actually accounts for about 15% of the steel made in Brazil, which is we'll do what's called pig iron, which is you transform the iron ore into iron using charcoal, which is just wood from planted forest. Millions of hectares of planted forests in Brazil that then are transformed into charcoal, and from there you do the pig iron. And then to become steel, you have the furnace the electric furnace in Brazil. Now, what's the difference between these and, for instance, what you have a bit in the US? You have something called a sponge iron that actually use natural gas often. Well, in the natural gas, you just get the carbon to the atmosphere, but you have not sequestrated before in the trees. In Brazil, when you have the whole cycle. And then, of course, our electricity is a carbon-free, maybe 95% carbon-free. It's not a plant run in natural gas. So when you think about this, and I tell you, to keep those forests and to do the charcoal, you get a lot of jobs involved into that. So it's an activity that preserves life. Actually, the biomass produced by these forests exceeds by a large margin what is burned, because you have all the branches, the leaves, you have the roots, everything that's not burned, and you have the jobs. So these are the things that, unfortunately, all this green steel today, I believe, doesn't get a premium anywhere. But when you get carbon prices, for instance, that you give a huge boost to and there'll be the bust of the emissions, actually. So these are the kind of things that if you organize more, and it goes with the pricing that I mentioned before, and this analysis of risk that depends so much on the kind of information of data that Andrew makes available for us. But in all these cases, and think very simple technology like the charcoal, we could improve the efficiency of transforming trees in charcoal at least by 100%. Nowadays, you need 5 tons of trees to get 1 ton of charcoal. This is bad. This is really bad. There are ovens that are twice as efficient. And I'm sure that there are people that are able to invent ovens that will be even more efficient, which will mean that the price will come down and you may increase the share of steel, which will still be necessary. You have to build things in Brazil. We are still a poor country. There are needs of houses and tons of things to be done, but you can do it in a sustainable way, in a competitive way. And this is why these macro models and so on, with a lot of detailed data, told us that yes, we could generate literally trillions of dollars in addition wealth, in addition production, and improve wages to people by going along the sustainable way.
Thank you, Levi. Now it's good to hear about opportunities on the steel sector, which is often considered a hard to mitigate sector, right? Because yes, of the issues that you raised. So it's good to think about the integration between the steel sector and nature-based solutions through plantation and sequestration of carbon through plants, right? I think that's very interesting. I'm really sorry, but we are running out of time. And Margarise, I think we have time for one question from the audience. Is that right?
Yes, we do. Thank you so much to everybody that sent us questions. Won't have time to answer all of them. We just hope that Levi and Andrew will be back. Fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. So I'll just quickly read 2 questions from our audience, and you can briefly answer them if you can. Our friend Fabio Nunes de Paula with Indicator Capital, investor here in the Valley. How do you compare agro-technology stage from Brazil versus the US? And Cristiane Nascimento asks, with the current environmental issues in Brazil, how the sustainable movement can progress?
Well, let me jump into these. These are very good questions, and I know some of the people who are really at the forefront of technology. Look, I'm not a specialist in agri-tech, but I can tell you, people in Brazil invest a lot. All these, many of the big farmers and so on, invest a lot to know about the soil conditions, the best way to use their equipment, and so on and so forth. I will not be surprised that we're very close to what is done in the US. And I think that more and more, they're investing also to make their production compatible and sustainable, so compatible with preserving the nature, because they know that the natural resources are one big advantage for agriculture in Brazil. So I believe that, and in particular, like I mentioned, during the period of COVID, it was amazing how much of, say, remote say consultancy, remote control of farms. I know friends that were controlling their farm from say their house in São Paulo because they could not travel, but also a lot of people who had trouble and so on could get the information, show things, pass the data. So it's amazing how much this has changed. Now, I forgot the second question. Can you remind me just very briefly, and I respond in 1 minute?
Sure. Is with the current environmental issues in Brazil, how do you see the sustainable movement progressing?
Well, look, the private sector is very much committed to improve the sustainability of the economy and address some of the real issues that we have, particularly in the Amazon. And I think, in particular with respect to Amazon, there's a whole rethinking of how economic activity should be developed there. And there's where, the more I study, I'm more convinced that innovation will be so important. There is room for traditional things, but they would have to be done in a different way. Think about, for instance, livestock. Well, to continue to do that, you have to change the way, for instance, that you compensate for that. So how integrate livestock with forestry, how integrate with agriculture, how you measure if you are really adding, because of this integration, if you are adding carbon to the soil, which could be extremely powerful way to compensate for the emissions of livestock. In addition to the whole management of the landscape, all of these require data. All of this, like Andrew said, is of a certain level, but a high level sometimes of complexity, but have to be translated in very simple ways of doing things so that you also can have local people implementing. So there's where I think innovation, information, new data, mechanisms for predictions, AI, and so on, can have a tremendous role. And I believe people will pay for that. The main companies in Brazil, one of them is worth $11 billion in raising cows. So if you have a technology that addresses these problems, address the traceability, to know if a cow was raised in a legal area or not, these kind of things, information, monitoring, measurement, people will pay for that, because this has a strong market value, because people in the other side of the world, you say, I'm not going to buy this meat, this beef, if I'm not sure that it was produced with high standards of sustainability. And for that, you need information, data, and a lot of innovation, ingenuity. So I think that's what we need to have a new Amazon.
Well said.
And I think Leo also did a very interesting work in Brazil with some of the suppliers, Leo. I think it would be appropriate for you to share briefly before we call the next panel.
Sure, we have been working on exactly the topic that Levi mentioned with the cattle sector in the Amazon and in the Cerrado in Brazil for several years now, funding a portfolio of projects which is very collaborative and includes several of those companies that Levi was mentioning, to figure out what are the technological solutions that could be implemented, but not only working with them, but also with the financial sector to make sure that there are incentives that can be tweaked to support that transition. So working, for example, prototyping tools that can help the cattle sector track the movement of animals from the bird farm to the slaughterhouse, working with the government with the credit policy, helping them figure out how the credit policy can be used to help farmers get access to an incentive that allows them to produce more in the same amount of land, so they don't need to cut down the forest. We have funded startups which do all that in a very cool and innovative business model where they help farmers actually do that, right? And help farmers connect with financiers. So there's plenty of stuff that we have done, and I think you know, it's a very promising sector, but one that still needs a significant heavy lifting because it's not an easy sector to shift, right? But it's going to have to shift given all the trends that we discussed, because the cattle sector is still the culprit of most of the problems. If we look at in the Amazon, right, with deforestation, they are responsible for 80% of the deforestation rates.
And at the same time, Leo, at the same time, there are billions of people in Asia that crave and need this protein.
Yeah.
So you have to find a sustainable way to do that, because this brings peace, this brings stability all over the world.
Exactly, and jobs too in the rural area in Brazil, right? Because we can't just get rid of cattle, even though, you know, it's exciting to see these plant-based companies raising so much funds. I think $1.4 billion was just raised by Possible Foods. You know, the best case scenario that I have seen with the report of Goldman Sachs is that plant-based meats can cover maybe 15% of the global market, but still you're going to have cattle production for many decades to come, right? It's not like coal that you can just replace it with gas, right? Cattle production is very ingrained in the culture of people, right, in this region. So we're going to have to figure out a way of doing that more sustainably while we figure out ways of producing alternative products that are as healthy and more sustainable than beef.
Yeah. I do think it's interesting that we're entering a period where there are these moments of very profound transition. Obviously, COVID is a pivotal moment. People like to say it's a seismic event, and it literally was a seismic event. When the world shut down due to COVID, the seismographs of people who ran those instruments actually settled. You could see the quieting of the earth. And sustainable development, I think, is another one of those major pivots where societies that make investments, economies and communities and companies that make investment, there's a moment when, you know, it's a singular moment. When you put a price on carbon, suddenly the world splits between those who are ready and those who are really not. And then the world begins to deselect for those that are not adapted to the next chapter. And we know that ultimately, because the physics of the planet wins, that we know we will either get to a sustainable future in a painful way, or we'll get to a sustainable future in an incredible, you know, in an unpainful way, or in a very painful way. And so I think making this investment now prepares us for, you know, this post-COVID. I think it's going to be a kind of zooming moment for sustainability. So the time to be investing in this is today, I think.
Certainly. Leo, let's bring our next panel, and Andrew and Levi, if you have a few more minutes, we would love for you to stay here in the discussion. We are going to present 3 Brazilian startups, and if you can stay here with us, would love to bring you back after their presentations.
Well, I'd love to. Unfortunately, I have another commitment, but if Leo or you send me the link and you have it taped or whatever name you call these days, I would love to watch it later tonight. And again, thank you so much. It was a wonderful conversation. I was so impressed by everything that Andrew shared with us, and in particular with your work and all the commitment around the Bay Area to these fundamental issues for our livelihood and our existence. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Levi.
Thank you so much. Muito obrigada, Levi. It was a pleasure having you. Muito obrigada, Andrew. Fascinating work. Thank you so much. I hope to have you both back.
Yes, would be wonderful. Thank you for all you're doing in this. It's a really vital conversation. Joaquin and Leo, it was great to chat with you both today, and nice to hear from everybody else. And for what it's worth, please, if you're interested, visit planet.com, send me an email. I'm Andrew at planet.com. If you have a specific question, we'd love to to help. We have huge investments in Brazil as an organization. We work with Mato Grosso, and we work around with a number of big forestry companies and state governments and city governments and tech and agricultural finance organizations, and with the nonprofit sector, some of which is supported directly by work that Leo leads at the foundation, and we really care about the country. So thank you for having us. It was an honor.
Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew.
Thank you so much. And let's now bring our guest speakers, startups, co-founders that are helping smart farming in Brazil in different ways. So here they are. Welcome, Mariana Vasconcelos, co-founder and CEO of AgroSmart. Alexandre Borges, co-founder and CEO of Grão Direto. And Fábio Sakamoto, co-founder and COO of Rizoma Agro. Sorry, we went over a little bit in the previous panel. This is such a fascinating discussion. So we are getting here late, but so happy to have you here. Bem-vindos.
Thank you.
And I'll pass the ball to you again, Leo.
Sure, thank you, Margarise. So I also have an overview for food specifically. I will try to keep it much shorter than I planned, so we have more time to hear our colleague panelists. But I just wanted to highlight that the food sector is such a critical sector for sustainability, both because the food sector has a huge environmental footprint globally. If you imagine how much land is demanded, how much water is needed, and all the inputs that go into producing food all over the continents, right? At the same time, the food sector needs to be a critical part of the solution, because there's so many technologies, some of them which will be showcased by our colleagues here in this panel, but many others which are already available that could allow us to actually meet multiple goals at the same time. And I wanted to just illustrate what the challenge we have at hand is. It's a big challenge. If you think about how much food the world needs to produce by 2050, it is about twice as much as we have been producing today. So it means that in 30 years, we need to double the amount of production we have achieved today. So we took 10,000 years to get where we are, and we have 30 years to produce, twice as much, right? And we don't have the same resources we had before. The best lands are occupied, the best access to water is being used, right? And we don't have as many input, as much input that we had before. So we are gonna have to be really smart about how we are gonna meet those goals. And last year, we actually funded a very interesting global study to look at how these solutions can be met, right? What are the things that need to be done so that we can achieve a vision by 2050 where we are producing food enough for ensuring food security while respecting the planetary boundaries, right? While avoiding trashing the world, right, more than we are doing today. And I won't spend too much time on my slides, but I don't have, I don't want to actually get into too much detail, but this is the report was prepared by the Food and Land Use Alliance, which is a global alliance of great global organizations that look at these issues around food, around biodiversity, climate, and land use. And they developed 10 critical transitions for us to achieve that vision. And I would encourage you all to review the report, and we can send the link because it has very good numbers about where the business opportunity is on that. But I just wanted to illustrate that there are several strategies that will have to be pursued in tandem for us to be able to achieve those goals. And this creates ample opportunity for human ingenuity and for entrepreneurs and investors to jump in and capture those opportunities. But basically, they include improving diets with more nutritious food. And we talked a little bit about startups who are developing artificial meat or plant-based meat. There are nature-based solutions, which is basically the things that I focus a lot nowadays, which is reducing deforestation, linked to the production of food or making sure we are restoring the ecosystems. There's questions about increasing the number of choices that somebody can have when somebody is looking for specific types of food. We know that beef is the food type that has the largest footprint. So there are plenty of other options one could use. So diversifying the diet and generating other options will have an important role as well. And then there is all the role of inclusion, right? Of thinking about just rural transitions. To make sure that the local people who live in these rural areas, they stay there, they have opportunity to continue producing food on those places, because there is a huge movement from the rural to the urban sector, which is actually creating some problems in food production in some places in the world. So let me stop sharing it. So this is my key message in terms of what's happening globally. And then I'd like to say, is it possible to talk about food and sustainability without talking about Brazil, right? Brazil is one of the top exporters and one of the top producers of food in the world. Agriculture is the major economic sector in the country, so it's a real priority for the government. But Brazil has contrasts, right? Has major contrasts. You can see in Brazil hubs of world-class pockets of entrepreneurship and innovation in different places in the country. They can compete with everyone in the world. At the same time, you have deforestation, all these outdated production models, deforestation, land grabbing, inappropriate labor conditions, very inefficient use of natural resources, right? And there's growing scrutiny on that, right? International markets and even inside Brazil, as Levi was saying, there's now a movement to support the transition in that system because there's no reason for us to keep them, right? Brazil has a huge amount of land that has been converted, can produce food for decades in those lands without having to deforest any patch of land. So we need to figure out how to use that technology and disseminate that technology as far as we can to address those challenges. So I end here, and I would like to invite the three colleagues to make a short presentation about each one of their companies. It's a 4-minute presentation just to give a taste to the audience on what each one of those organizations is focusing on, and then we will move into a conversation with the three of them. So I would suggest that we start with Mariana.
Hi guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
Great, so I'm very happy to see familiar faces, not only within this crowd, but also with the other crowd. We both work with Safra and with Planet. So it's fun to see everyone together, and really shows how agriculture is an ecosystem. We really need each other to make things happen, and we keep encountering each other in terms of change. So I will tell you a little bit about AgriSmart. We founded AgriSmart. We will complete 6 years now in September, so like 6 years ago. With the goal to help farmers to make a better decision. As I come from a farming family, and I followed up very closely the daily challenges in the field and how farmers relied on intuition and in others in order to decide what to do. And as climate changed and the conditions were changed, it was harder and harder every day for farmers to adapt and have to learn everything again in the field. So that's our first idea, like really helping farmers to shift from this intuition to data-driven decisions. And we faced a lot of challenges in the way. The first one was infrastructure with connectivity. Not only Brazil, but several other emerging countries have no internet or cell phone signal in the field. So we focused first on solving that challenge and being able to capture data from sensors in the field, so we would understand the local microclimate conditions. And with that, we realized that data was not enough, that we really needed to help farmers to use that data to make better decisions and obtain return on investment. So we started creating algorithms for supporting decision-making in irrigation, in weather forecast, in disease forecasting, and planning the whole operations in the day-to-day. And as we were evolving, we became a platform that today tackles the whole supply chain agriculture to ensure that we are able to produce more and being sustainable at the same time. So like it's a platform with 4 layers. The first thing we do is data collection and crop monitoring with sensors, satellite imagery, and so on. We use artificial intelligence and so on to generate insights for the farmers, such as recommending how much water to use, recommending if there is a disease risk or not, or how should they plan their spraying, their sowing, and harvesting based on our climate. But we also work across the supply chain with the input companies when they are doing their R&D to understand how a seed responds to different climatic conditions, or if they're testing a biological product and how is the most efficient protocol to use it, to the food supply chain, where we monitor their suppliers that are usually smallholder farms. Brazil has the diversity and its richness of having a large-scale farming and a smallholder farming. So we deploy sensors in a shared economy model, and we monitor those very small farms, and we help them individually, but we help the food and beverage companies to understand better their supply chain, measure their impact, and plan better their long-term sourcing strategy. Up to the banks and financial institutions, where we're helping them to mitigate their risk and create more accessible financial products for farmers. So we really like make the data flow across the supply chain, because we believe the change has to be systematic. There's a lot of challenge on deploying technology in the field. It's a transformation journey. Like the farmers, they are not ready to completely shift. So we have to start little by little having data, using them in decisions, integrating them, because they don't want to have 20 apps where they have to check stuff and decide what to do, and making use of the skills of the corporate side and the supply chain to support farmers in that change towards impact. So you talk about fancy words, and I like the fancy words, the SDGs. We directly impact the SDGs 2 for zero hunger, 5 for gender equality, 6 with water, the use of water and irrigation, 9 and 12 in terms of sustainable production, consumption, innovation of the industry, and the 13 on climate resilience. And we really think it's important to talk about that, because we have to feed the world and we have to produce more, but there is no way that we can feed the world if we destroy our environment. So like we really try to put the two things together and help farmers to and the supply chain understands that nature is power. And when we understand it, we can make it work together, preserving our resources and using it in our favor to increase yield. So when I listen about the previous conversation talking about carbon, I'm super excited about nature climate solutions in general. We joined the Nature Climate Solutions Alliance in the World Economic Forum in the beginning of the year, and we're very excited about like using our tech and combining with other partners' tech in order to be able to metrify impact and finding financial solutions to support farmers to adopt it, because it's always the challenge, like, will the consumer pay in the end for more sustainability? And not always they do. What are the financial instruments? We barely have financing for farming. Who will know about like implementing sustainable solutions? So I'm really excited about that future, and being able to use tech not only for the day-to-day operations, but also for allowing new financial instruments into that way and measuring impact. I also feel very excited about Amazonia and how like we can use the preservation and the new sustainable ways of producing and extract value out of Amazonia without deforestation. And well, that's where we are. We are like today in 9 countries of operations with up over 30,000 sensors connected in the platform. A little bit on the perspective.
Great, thank you a lot, Mariana. I look forward to making a few questions and having going a little deeper in the organization. It's really impressive, the work that you have done so far. So I would like to invite Fabio to talk about Rizoma Agro.
Hello, Leo. Thank you for the invitation. Oi, Mari. Hello, Alex, who I've not met yet, but pleasure to be here, sharing this panel. I'll just share my screen, Leo, really quickly. Can you guys see it?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'm one of the co-founders of Rizoma Agro, and our mission is to accelerate this transition to regenerative organic agriculture by creating what we want to be the world's most efficient supply network. So we're basically building on and combining 2 things for which Brazil has very high potential. One is what Leo mentioned before, the nature-based solutions. So Brazil has a unique opportunity for promoting regenerative agriculture. And the other, as we all know, Brazil is the land of large-scale efficient farming. So we're trying to combine that to accelerate this transition. And in order to do that, we have to, 1, prove the viability of this type of farming, which is something quite new. And then once we prove that it's viable, how do we scale this for impact? Just a little bit on our background. We are kind of a startup, but we're a 12-year-old startup. We actually started In 2008, some Brazilians will recognize Fazenda da Toca. So my business partner, Pedro Paulo Diniz, started Fazenda da Toca 12 years ago, and it was a very pioneering initiative, kind of ahead of its time. Developed a lot of R&D and market knowledge, etc. We've created Rizoma 3 years ago when we realized this market was changing, and this is what we've been busy with. So in order to prove viability, you need to prove that this type of agriculture is just as productive and just as cost efficient as conventional agriculture. And this is what our R&D has been focused on. And we've been able to prove that you're able to produce 53 bushels per acre of soy in São Paulo, which is just the same as GMO conventional soy production, and more than 185 bushels per acre on corn, using a combination of machinery, technology, and just expertise. And in terms of cost, we are not there yet, but we're very close. And so there's a huge potential not only to serve the growing organic market, but also to replace conventional production. All the plant-based burgers that are based on soy should probably come from organic soy. And then how do you scale this for impact? Well, first, we've creating a company that's built for scaling. We have over 50 employees doing research, development, business development. We're already the #1 organic grains and pulses producer in Brazil. And we have all this infrastructure, which we've already developed. And we are accessing capital markets to access green bonds and continue our expansion. But we're also, as I said, the land of large scale farming. So you have over 30,000 farmers that are larger than 1,000 hectares in the Cerrado. And this is an opportunity for us to convert these farmers who are very entrepreneurial, very open for change. And the way to do that is we work with them on a regenerative organic as a service platform, basically offering everything that we've developed for ourselves to these farmers using a lot of technology in this platform. And we can talk more about this later. This is a purpose-driven company. So it's not just about creating a business, it's about how do we improve the conditions. And that's the definition of regenerative agriculture. It's not about doing less harm. It's about reversing the damage that was done. And so basically we've measured our systems using the GHG protocol by WRI, and our grain crops actually sequester 1.9 tons of CO2 per hectare per year. And our agroforestry, our citrus crops sequester a whopping 46 tons. So just to give an idea, if these systems were upscaled and applied in all of agriculture in the world, half of our problem would be over. Agriculture has the potential to be this huge carbon sink. So this is, we start with the mission, we end with the mission, and this is how we think we're doing our bit. And I'd be happy to talk more in our Q&A.
Great, thank you, Fabio. I have known this business for a while, and it's really great to see it growing and evolving. I would like to call Alexandre now.
Hey everyone, can you hear me? Yeah. Well, I will also share my screen here, just a sec. Yeah. Can you see my screen? Yep.
Not yet. Saying that it started screen sharing. Double click to enter full screen mode. Yeah, now we got it.
Oh, great. Well, it's good to meet you, Fabio. Great presentation. Great things you're doing there. And also, it's an honor to share this panel with Mariana. I'm a huge fan of Mariana as a professional, as a CEO, and also I'm a huge fan of AgroSmart. So it's a huge honor to share this panel with you guys. I will talk a bit about Grão Direto. We are digitally transforming agricultural commodity trading here in Brazil. I'm sure that everyone knows here, but agriculture is a $1 trillion market worldwide. Brazil is huge. Brazil is the second largest grain trading exporting country in the world, and is growing faster than the US. And everything in the financial market, especially in grains, is traded over the phone. It's amazing. It was a surprise for me when we were starting this. And we used to say that, imagine if you were responsible for bringing computers into the stock market decades ago. This is pretty the same what we are doing and what is happening right now in agricultural commodity market. We started here in Grão Direto with the idea that within the farm, everything has changed. The way the farmer plants, the way he harvests, But one thing is still the same, the way he's doing business, he's trading his production. We used to say that the farmer, they already have a smartphone in their pockets, but they are using just the phone part to trade, not the smart one to trade. And this is exactly what we are addressing here, to really digitally enable farmers to interact with the digital systems that already exists. It can be from banks, from buyers, from logistical companies. So this digital transformation of the farm, outside the farm, is really happening right now. And the grain deals are the key to unlock a lot of different opportunities when you think of the farm. It can be storage opportunities, it can be logistical opportunities, it can be financial products and services. I think grain deals are the glue and the key to unlock all these opportunities of the farm. From our side here, we start helping them by connecting farmers and buyers in the physical market of grains. We are operating right now soybeans, corn, and sorghum in the spot, in the forward market, and also we are going to start barter operations as well. We have a lot of stories of success, a lot of great customers in love in what we are doing here. Stories of success with grain growers, with great companies like ADM, and also with small and medium-sized buyers like Commodities. We ended the first quarter of 2020 with more than 13,000 active users on the platform. The number of connected deals on the platform are also growing a lot. We are not just connecting and helping them to trade, but we are also collecting a lot of data. In the physical market of grains, for sure, we have the best market data in the areas where we are operating. We can produce like exclusive and strategic information about the physical market of grains. Last year, we introduced a very important thing here is the digital contracts, helping farmers and buyers to formalize their deals in a more secure and in a more faster and a more efficient way. And this is a very important tool for us in the future to start connecting and relating these contracts with financial services in the future. We are very proud to serve great companies like ADM, Dreyfus, Rivelli. Very proud to partner with Agência Estado and other great companies. And we have a very complementary team here. Like we have an expertise in business, expertise in agriculture, expertise in technology, and a very talented and beloved team that we have here. And it's going to be an honor to discuss a lot with you guys today.
Great, thank you, Alexandre. And I think one thing that stood out when we talked about Grão Direto is that you are actually helping many producers who often struggle to find a buyer in the right time, in the right conditions, right? So they can sell their product. So actually, you're providing a really good service for producers who often do not have a lot of access to technology, right? And are not familiar with the use of technology. So it's really interesting model that you have. And I would like to start with questions to you, taking advantage that you made the last presentation. And I will make a couple questions, okay? So the first one is about scalability. When I talk to investors, often investors are a little scary of the ag sector, right? Because they feel that there's not so much technology there, right? So, you know, there may be some barriers that will appear as the company grows. So my first question is, how are you thinking about scalability, and whether do you see some obstacles that you may face in the future as you grow your user base? And the second question is, what about sustainability, right? Because you are connecting people in the market, and I know that there's growing demand for sustainability attributes associated with grains and with beef and other products. So do you see a role for Grão Direto to help with that, to actually allow a buyer to find the producer who produces the product with that sustainability attribute that they are looking for?
Great and wonderful questions. I think I would try the first one regarding scalability. I think we can't think about startups without thinking about scalability. And the same goes when you think about agriculture, especially considering the main crops like cotton, grains, sugarcane, and everything else. And reaching the largest number of farmers is crucial to increasing the impact that we can have of these technologies in agriculture. Of course, connectivity is a challenge in agriculture to scale. This is very, very important, and Mariana can tell you much more about this, but I think it's more crucial when you think about IoT related solutions. However, in our case, we do not need the farm connected. We need the farmer to be connected. And the farmer, most of the time, is connected when you think about these main crops. McKinsey had a study recently, I think from March 2020, something like that, that they show that 95% of the farmers that produce these main crops, they have a connection with internet. They are internet connected. They have this kind of connectivity. So for our target audience here, the grain growers that produce these main crops, they already have a smartphone, as I told in my presentation. They have those smartphones in their pockets, but they're not using the smart part. They're just using the phone part to trade. And this is what we are addressing here. So in terms of scale, in our case here, it's the most important thing is how to reach them and how to engage with them. And I think that the three things that we learned here in our journey is to, how can I say, it's to use technology to talk about technology with farmers. Because they are already using Facebook, they are already using Instagram, they are already using WhatsApp. So you can like try to relate and to engage with them technologically, and then tell your message, tell about your solution. But one very, very important thing is to really understand why they are using the internet, how they are using it, what is their digital habits for you to be part of these digital habits of farmers. I think the second lesson that we learned here a lot, it's about their sense of community. Farmers, they have a very, very strong and keen, I may say, sense of community. You do not see, like, a farmer is not competing with his neighbor. They like to brag about themselves, they like to compare about themselves, but in the end of the day, they're not like really competing with his neighbor, his or her neighbor. And they love to, when they like something, they really love to refer that thing to their friends. They like to talk about it. So you can have a lot of advantage for your company in terms of scale if you take advantage of this sense of community. And I think the third thing that we learned a lot, it's speak their language. You have to speak their language. Farmers, they're very objective, they're very direct people. They are not attracted by, I don't know, the hype of complicated words. They are not attracted by acronyms. They're not attracted by terms and expressions in English. So keep it simple and bring them into your process of product development. I see farmers very welcoming and very willing to share experiences and perspectives with you regarding technology, regarding innovation. Right now, we cannot ask them for a beer, but we used to do this a lot before pandemic, and we are very anxious to have more and more beers with farmers in the short term. And regarding your second question about sustainability, here at Grão Direto, we are addressing the agricultural commodities market and more specific about grains as a whole. So in this journey, we are seeing that the sustainability agenda has grown in importance, has grown in the conversations, has grown in the market practices by buyers, by farmers, by brokers. And for sure, like even addressing the whole market about transgenic products, GMO products, non-GMO products, we are seeing that the sustainability topic is growing more and more over time. And I think the future of agricultural commodities trading is really closely linked to sustainability. In our case here, we see that adding and plugging environmental and also social compliance solutions into digital grain trading is something that we see gaining momentum right now. and this is something that we are very excited about, this type of opportunity to plug and add with the solution that we already have. But I think in the end, by digitally enabling farmers in the way we are doing here, I think you can offer a lot of different solutions and different services to them, and services that will take account sustainability, like we saw in the previous panel. And by achieving and reaching these services through a digital channel like we are providing to them, we can reflect this increase in demand for sustainability, and then offer more products, and then offer more farmers willing to sell and willing to practice sustainability.
Well, thank you so much, Alexandre. I will move directly to the other speakers. We don't have a lot of time, so I want to make sure everybody can address some questions. So moving to Fabio. Fabio, Brazil has about 200 million hectares of pastures, and we know that about 70% of that land, which is 4 times the size of California, by the way, is a huge area in Brazil, probably the largest area of pasture in the world. 70% is degraded, right? And that's why regenerative agriculture was created for, I think, was to improve the use of underutilized, degraded lands. So, in thinking about scale and thinking about this tremendous opportunity that lies in Brazil, how do you see Rizoma Agro expanding to, take a good chunk of that opportunity, right? That's my first question. My second question is about measurement, because I know that you don't want just to generate profit. You're very seriously looking at demonstrating the environmental benefits of your model. And as we discussed before, this is often challenging. So if you could tell us a little more than you told us during your presentation about how you're dealing with that, that would be great.
Okay, Leo. So to the first question about the degraded lands and the opportunity that we have, I think the first thing that we're doing is we're proving that it can be done profitably. These are usually marginal lands, and which are looking for the best use. And I'm trying to use a market-based solution where you have buyers in Brazil or elsewhere in the world willing to pay a premium for organic regenerative grain. And this is a great opportunity to use this land for this. If we get carbon credits on top of that, that'd be great, but it's not even in my business plan. So we're trying to do it in a way that you have a profitable agriculture that can use in that land. So we've been proving that it is possible. From an agronomical point of view, the 53 bushels per acre is 60 bags per hectare, given that a lot of the people here are Brazilian. So it can be done. On the commercial side, there's also been a lot of development because there is no grão direto for organic grain. We had to do all the business development ourselves. We have to go get on the plane or now on Zoom and talk to clients in Europe, in the US. We've exported grains to the US in Europe. We are doing this market development for Brazil. We are locking in long-term contracts with buyers. So that's how we're proving that it can be done commercially and agronomically. And then once you do that, your question about scale, right? So besides accessing capital markets and expanding our own production, which is just going to be a drop in this ocean, we're also going to work with farmers. And farmers are very entrepreneurial, very open to innovation, because if you have a system that yields double the margin per hectare at what they get in conventional, they are willing to shift. But as Mari has said, farming is a working capital business, and there's not even enough funding for that, just for the normal operation. So how do we unlock this and working with investors and capital markets to do that? So I think this is a huge opportunity, and just not waiting. Now I know I'm a big fan of your work and in the NGOs and government, but I think the private sector is trying to do that using market solutions. Like, how do we give a good use to this land? And in terms of measurement, measuring is key, because the consumer that pays a premium on an organic product wants to make sure that this product really has those claims. And I think, somebody mentioned before, we are going through the digital transformation in agriculture, and now you can have all this data. You're not just selling grain; you're selling grain plus a packet of data telling you exactly what was used in producing this grain, where this grain has been through, and what is the carbon footprint, etc. And we've been working, like I said, we've been working using WRI's GHG protocol by Imaflora, and working with partners in Brazil and in Holland, like Wageningen University. But I think in farming, we're very fortunate for one thing. For us, carbon is not a byproduct. Carbon is essential to farming. Soil organic matter is what we need. So I don't know any farmer that doesn't measure soil organic matter. So it's quite every year almost. So it's quite easy to prove impact. I think it's harder when you're trying to create kind of a financial market trading schemes where you're just trying to evaluate things from satellites but on the ground, it's not very hard to prove the impact. And just as we have metrics for carbon, we have metrics for biodiversity, which is also not very complicated, water and social. So it's not that difficult. And I think as the value chains become more and more transparent, and all this digital information that Mariana's sensors will be able to collect, and you will be able to give to the buyer and ultimately to the end buyer, to the end consumer that can pick up the product in the supermarket and scan it and know everything that's gone into it. I think we will get automatically premiums for those producers and for those companies that are adopting better practices.
Great, thank you so much, Fabio. Really, really exciting, I think, path forward. I'd like to shift now to Mariana. And Mariana, I would like to shift gears as well, where we have talked a lot about the environmental dimension of sustainability, but there is also the social dimension that Alexandre mentioned before. One thing that I often hear from scholars is that intensification and use of technology may actually exacerbate the inequality in the agriculture sector, right? However, I have recently seen Harvard professor Michael Kremer, who won a Nobel Prize in economics for his work on poverty alleviation. And he says that actually digital agriculture, as was mentioned, particularly precision agriculture, will actually help smallholders reduce costs and improve the price they get for their products. We know that smallholders make up the lion's share of producers in Brazil and in any place, right? That if you look at the numbers, the number is gigantic compared to even medium and large landholders. And I know that you have a project with smallholders, I think with Coca-Cola, right? But I'd love to hear more about how you see those groups using your technology.
Okay, so, well, you will hear my dogs barking in the background, like they decide when they want to bark and I cannot stop them. So, well, the first thing is one of the 6 Ds of the exponential tax is democratization. So I really believe in the power of technology on like helping smallholder farms and reducing inequalities. And of course, like you have to have that in mind in order to create a business model that will make that work. So yes, I agree with the professor that the technology will help the smallholder farmers to be included in the food system in a better way. The way that they use our platform and the way why we think that and we think we are able to include farmers is because the climate change and the way we produce today, and if we end the resources, they actually make farmers reduce their income or we stay without income. And if you have data and you can help them to make better decisions every day and only use inputs when they are needed or learn from the weather and plan their operations better, reducing rework and being able to increase yield by using the maximal potential of the genetic in the plant, we are helping them to produce more and to reduce costs and therefore having more income. So that's how it's directly related. The environmental KPIs and sustainability indexes are directly related to the social ones, because by producing more and using less inputs, they would directly have more income, higher margins, and this kind of things, right? And the way we are doing it, like you mentioned, the project with Coca-Cola is, like we said, like in a shared economy model. So we look for partners in corporations, cooperatives, or government to subside and help us to set up a network of the sensors. That is the most expensive part, because on the SaaS part is already democratized and it's easy for us to scale. But on the hardware side, like we deploy sensors in a region in a way that they cover as much as farmers as possible. And we count on the support of the corporations and government and so on to subside that. And then based on that data that is in there in the region, we generate individual insights for the farmers. So we tell each farmer in Coca-Cola, for example, how much to irrigate, to help them to understand better the different stages of the development of the plants and what are the kind of the diseases that they have to be alerts of and this kind of things. So besides Coca-Cola, we work with Nestle and Nespresso, like climate resilient supply chain. We work with Cargill in the tomato supply chain. So we were able to develop a framework on how to make it work, how we can bring a benefit to the corporation. And for them, it is a good investment to subsidize those equipments and those solutions for the farmers, because they will have more prediction if they will have a good season or not, if they will have the quality that they need for producing their food and this kind of things. So in the day-to-day, that's how we do. We look for a partner and then we deploy a project. We help the smallholder farmers in the region, but we also bring back value to the supply chain.
Great. No, that's exciting to hear, because often we hear that it's hard to work with smallholders, right? Because at times they don't have access to technology, they don't even have literacy. So it's really exciting to hear that you're able to use this world-class technology with them in partnership with these very large companies. Congratulations.
There's a lot of investment in design, right? Like an understanding the customer experience. Yes, the interfaces and the way we communicate with the smallholder is different from a professional farmer. The product itself for us is the same, but the way like we set up the deployment and the communication is differently. Yes, many of them cannot read, so we use a lot of emojis. Many of them don't have the connectivity, so there's different sources of accessing it. Like we send in the WhatsApp, we send in the SMS and this kind of thing. So we have to adapt to be flexible.
Great, cool. So Margarise, I'd like to pass to you now for questions from the audience.
Yes, hi. Thanks, guys. This has been very interesting to hear what your companies are doing. That's really fascinating. We got several questions here. I want to start with one from our friend here in the region, dietitian Roberta Ritter. And she's asking about the strategies that you know of to increase food access and affordability. What can you comment on that?
I would say like technology could help to decentralize food production, like having more regions, different systems of food production, like in the urban farming, vertical farming, traditional farming, regenerative farming. So like the more diversity you have and the more technology we use, you are able to decrease the cost. And just like as they would increase the income for the farmer, it will also decrease the cost of the food itself.
And just to jump in a bit about this, when you also increase the efficiency of the whole supply chain, also the transaction cost is going to be lower, and so you can have more access to food production as well.
Margarise, I would just comment that food production is very diversified. So you have like fruits and vegetables that can come locally, and you have coffee and cacao, which will not come locally in Europe or in the US most of the time. So it's just about finding efficiencies in the system, finding and doing a mix of all these different things. I think there is role for urban farming, peri-urban farming, and also large-scale specialized farming. I think there's a place in it for everyone. It's just about setting up a more intelligent food system with less intermediaries and less waste. I think we talk about cost of food. Agribusiness has done a miracle in bringing the cost of food really, really down. It's actually, I would actually argue that maybe it's time we spend less money on medicine and on pharma companies and more money on food and disintermediating this value chain and bringing more nutrient-dense food and making less waste. I think that would bring efficiencies in the system.
And a related question here that came from Zoom, Marina Campos. She asks, what could be the role of public policies to accelerate the transitions towards sustainable food? Since not everybody has access, so what kind of policies can help? And Leo, you can wait on this as well.
Well,
like
just go ahead, Maria.
No, on our side, we are seeing a lot of government interest in creating awareness and creating ways to finance technology. So like supporting agtech ecosystems, creating financing lines. We've recently joined a UNDP program called Cultivate. that was an initiative from several governments looking for climate resilience and food production innovations, so they could take it to their country and like help to create private partnerships locally to implement it. So we end up with Bhutan. Like we are working now with different projects and partners to be able to take climate resilient technology to Bhutan. So I think like the government has to lead to make it democratic, especially for the smallholders, like to have an awareness and be able to bring together. And by the policies, I will give an example on the water side. So like irrigation is one of the challenges, right? We really need water for producing more and fighting climate change, but we use almost 70% of our water in irrigation, and almost half of it is wasted because farmers don't really know how or like how much to irrigate and this kind of things. And even though it comes back to the environment, sometimes it's lost in the way with the like rainfall changes in the patterns or contaminating the water. So like that's where legislation has an important role. We already have to have a license for using water. Some of the countries and regions already implementing charge, because there is this mindset like if I don't pay, I don't care. So like there is a charge of implementation in the water, and they could add like that they have to do some kind of irrigation management. It can be using tech, it can be using a service. It can be provided by the government, by technical assistance to the smallholders, but there should be a way, for example, to oblige when you have to use an input or you are certifying for exports and this kind of things, you force farmers to change their behavior.
Well, I have more questions here, but we are getting to the end of our discussion.
Can we just listen to Leo's comment? Because I got quite curious. I know you have 1 minute.
No, my comments are not as interesting as yours. No, I think there's a big role for the government to provide finance to the risk innovations, right? Because often ag is seen as a risky endeavor for the commercial finance sector. Not that it doesn't exist, but I think the government could boost the amount of capital that flows for best management practices for these types of technologies that you are developing. The other thing is obviously ensuring that there's access to internet and there's electricity, right, in the frontier areas, so farmers, especially the smallholders, they can have access to the technologies that you are producing. And finally, there's a critical role in terms of digitizing public data and making that public data available for startups like yours, for farmers, for other companies, because the government has a lot of information about farming in the country, which often is not open for use, right? And one of the key areas that people are interested now is traceability. And the government can do a lot with existing data. They just need to digitize it when it is not digitized, and then integrate that data, connect the dots across different data sets, and we can have a transformation in terms of what we understand about what's happening on the ground in the entire country, and also have a solution to address some of the challenges we discussed.
Thanks, Leo. And I would love for you to finalize this, learning a little bit more from each of your companies. What is the next steps now? For example, Mariana just told us that she's working with the Bhutan government. I want to hear from Rizoma and from Grão Direto as well. So how big are you? Because this question comes because we were reached out by a few investors here in the region that are looking to invest in Brazilian agtechs. So first question, where are you at now? Are you looking for new investments? And what is the next steps on each of your companies? Alex, why don't you start?
Thanks for the question. Here we are very focused on expanding to new regions here in Brazil, to expand to new states, and to start tackling new crops in Brazil. In terms of product, we are going to add some other layers into our product related to financial product and services, and also connecting with logistical solutions to offer a more complete solution to farmers and to buyers as well. And in terms of growing, we have a team that is planned to double to the end of the year. So people that is looking for working in agtech space can send us your curriculum. We're going to be anxious.
That's great to hear. So you guys are growing, you guys are hiring, correct?
Yeah.
Great. And are you looking for investment, Alex?
An entrepreneur is every time, all the time looking for investor. Fundraising, it's a 24/7 job for us. We are every time looking for great opportunities to get great partners. We do not have a specific fundraising movement right now. We have just closed one recently, but we are very open to talk and to know new partners. Good guys is all the time welcome here.
Great. Fabio.
Margarise, we've just completed an important stage and reached the milestones that I mentioned. So the past 3 years was about proving that the model is viable from an agronomic and commercial point of view. We've proved that. We are now able to access capital markets. We are about to complete and announce an emission of a green bond because now we're able to pass in all the diligences and so very high standards. We are open to partners who want to expand and want to invest in other farms. We are currently farming on 1,900 hectares, planting 1,900 hectares, which for us was R&D. It's still relatively a small company in terms of revenue, about 30 million reais when all these areas are converted to organic and producing. Again, this was just an R&D test. So now we're ready to scale up. We're exactly at the moment when we're ready to scale. So we'd be happy to interact with people who want to invest either in our bonds or also invest directly in the company through special purpose vehicles, invest in the farms. So that's, we're already built for growth. We are already more than 50% strong, but we are constantly increasing and growing the team. So the same applies. I think Alex mentioned, we're always looking for talent, always looking for good investors, good partners.
Great. It's awesome to hear because we've hosted startups here that are not in a similar position, are having to scale back because of the crisis. So that's awesome to hear. And Mariana, so good to have you. I've invited you other times to participate in our conference. I'm a fan of Mariana's work, so it's good to have you, Mariana. So tell us what's going on now next for AgroSmart.
Well, for us, we kind of share the scenario with the guys here. I think agriculture has shown to be a resilient industry to the pandemic. It actually gained more importance. I agree with Leo that in the beginning of the year, there was a huge already like the era of the action. We have to take care of our environment and look to climate resilience and this kind of things. And then we thought it would stop with the pandemic, but it didn't. Like it took some, like a mess, right? Like there was disruptions, but now we saw like a more appetite from the industry, from the farmers to speed up the adoption of technology so they can become more resilient and have the traceability that we need to communicate the word that Brazilian food is safe and this kind of things. As a next step, we are focusing now on consolidating ourselves as this platform for the different segments in the supply chain and gaining market penetration to become a leader in Latin America. We have kind of a round open, like a convertible round. It's quite recent. We are moving into a consolidation thesis. So we are performing some M&As. We already have one undergoing in Argentina. And we are fundraising for that because we think the pandemic is the best time to do that, to find assets that could be add to our own thesis, like, and help us to have more features in the platform or expanding geographic footprint. So the message is here for both investors that are looking into this thesis on like scaling a technology through M&A and through like impact, and also for companies that are open to M&A conversations, also looking for talents always. And we think the M&A is a good way to find good talent to help grow the company. So I think for us, that's the short and medium term plan, is to consolidate those M&As with a convertible round so we can go for a Series B next year.
Wow. Excellent. Wonderful to hear that too. Well, thank you so much to each one of you. Wish you much success. And Leo, your final words, and along with my gratitude for leading this session. It's been fascinating, and I certainly would love to bring this subject back to our events and to our conference. Muito obrigada, Leo. Your final words.
Sure. No, thank you, Margarise. It was very exciting to prepare for it and to hear all what we heard from this amazing panel. You know, people doing great things on the edge of innovation. I think we heard about the marketplace, Grão Direto. We heard about precision agriculture with AgroSmart. We heard about a completely different business model to scale regenerative organic agriculture to technical assistance, access to finance. So very different models, and all of them are important. They are focusing on the right things, and you know, there's a pretty nice interface with sustainability, right? So it's really nice to see this new generation, you know, thinking about how to connect the dots across ag, sustainability, and technology. And I'm sure there are many others that could be showcased here, but it was really great to see these three startups. And again, thank you everybody for joining us for the conversation, and feel free to reach out if you want to continue the conversation offline.
Great.
Thank you, guys. I will. We didn't have time to chat before, so now I will look forward to chat after.
Great to have you all here and working in these essential technologies to improve our farm and really get a sustainable environment. Muito obrigada. And for those of you who join us, thank you so much. We are going to be back next week with a discussion about artificial intelligence and humanity. Investments in artificial intelligence are on the rise. We'll be gathering investors and founders to discuss how AI has the potential to transform every industry sector and how this transformation can be for good. That's next Thursday. Obrigada. Ciao.
Obrigada,
Bye-bye.
pessoal.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Thank you.